Several killed and hundreds injured in Jakarta as thousands protest Joko Widodo's re-election. Can his victory be challenged? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is Indonesia's post-election violence. Schools have been shut, shops closed, and more than 30,000 soldiers deployed to the streets. Riots broke out in Jakarta on Tuesday following the release of election results. Incumbent President Joko Widodo won 55.5% of the vote, but opposition leader Prabowo Subianto is legally challenging the results, claiming irregularities, and thousands who agree with him have taken to the streets. Indonesia's electoral committee has rejected Prabowo's accusation of fraud, but he and his supporters aren't so easily convinced. So, are they right? Or is Prabowo just being a sore loser? Natalie Perhanen reports.
For 2 nights in Jakarta, usually calm streets became battlegrounds. Rocks and Molotov cocktails thrown from one direction. Tear gas fired from the other. Several people have died and hundreds are injured. It all started after the official presidential election results were released. The incumbent, Joko Widodo, beat his rival Prabowo Subianto by more than 17 million votes. But when some Prabowo supporters heard the outcome, they rallied. The demonstrations on the first day were peaceful, but then night fell. There's been shock at the scale of the riots in Jakarta. This was some of the worst politically linked violence in Indonesia in decades. The government says the situation is now under control.
Kita tidak akan memberikan ruang untuk perusuh-perusuh yang akan merusak negara kita dan merusak negara kesatuan Republik Indonesia.
Police say provocateurs were responsible for some of the violence. Prabowo, who has rejected the official results, urged his supporters to protest peacefully.
Like what we have said many times, we support the use of constitutional rights in a peaceful, non-violent way in the political struggle of our nation. Therefore, I urge all parties, the people, the police, the military, and all relevant parties to refrain themselves and avoid violence as they express their aspirations.
Prabowo plans to mount a legal challenge before the Constitutional Court, like he did in 2014 when he lost to Widodo the first time. His camp has alleged widespread fraud and cheating in the election. The election agency says there's no evidence of systematic cheating. But even before April's vote, some Prabowo supporters called for protests if there were doubts about the result.
The election organisers have cheated and committed injustice. As a citizen of this nation, this is my calling. The cheating has violated human rights and the rights of the citizens.
Why could the vote counting be wrong? Because you can't mess around with God. God will punish people who are messing with their lives with dishonesty, with injustice.
The demonstrators are in the minority. Widodo secured a double-digit win over his rival. It's a strong mandate for his second term.
Setelah dilantik di bulan Oktober nanti, kami adalah presiden dan wakil presiden seluruh rakyat Indonesia. Kami adalah pemimpin dan pengayom dari 100% rakyat Indonesia. Kami akan berjuang keras demi terwujudnya keadilan sosial bagi seluruh rakyat Indonesia, bagi 100% rakyat Indonesia.
The next test of that leadership will be how he responds to the fallout from the riots. His job now is to find a path to unity, even with the political divisions. Natalie Perhanen, The Newsmakers.
Let's go to our panel now. In Jakarta is Derajat Wibowo. He's a member of the opposition National Mandate Party and is on the advisory board of the National Committee to elect Prabowo and Sandi. And also from Jakarta is Shoaib Kagda, who's the founder of the Indonesian Economic Forum. Before that, he was a correspondent who covered Indonesia for more than 20 years. And in Melbourne is Greg Barton, a professor of global Islamic politics at Deakin University. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Shoaib, trouble on the streets. Are those people protesters or rioters, or does it depend on who you ask?
Well, I think there's a mixture of both. There's a majority of them were protesters. But I think in the midst of them, there were some troublemakers and rioters, as you say. Hopefully, the police have arrested most of them. They've arrested more than 250 of these troublemakers and inciters of violence and social unrest. But I think there were also genuine protesters on the streets of Jakarta over the last 2 days.
Greg Barton, Jokowi got 55% of the vote. This spasm of violence on the streets after the announcement of that. Is there any reason to doubt the election result? Was it a free and fair election?
There's no reason to doubt the overall result. Obviously, there, with 800,000 polling booths and 160 million people or thereabouts lodging their votes, there will be some irregularities, but there's nothing to suggest systematic fraud or problems of a scale that would call the results into question. The gap is 17 million votes, 11%. So that seems pretty clear.
Rajat Wibowo, so why then is Prabowo alleging, quote, massive cheating and irregularities? Where's the proof?
Yes, this is cannot be said as a fair and a free election, because there has been some irregularities and also the involvement of state apparatus into to some degree coercing rural votes to vote to the incumbent. There are those are some instances that we documented. And also, there is a huge gap between the number of votes for presidential election and the number of votes for the legislative elections. The gap is 14 million, around 14 million votes. As you know, voters are given both presidential election paper ballot and also legislative election paper ballots at the same time, and it's just a little bit beyond normal to have 14 million.
Well, maybe they just don't like the presidential candidate, Rajat. I mean, if we look at it and if we analyze that nobody's coming out, none of the election monitors are coming out and saying there's widespread proof of rigging. It looks as if, Rajat, Prabowo is risking people's lives by calling them to go out onto the streets, by telling them that there was rigging. Prabowo is risking people's lives because of sour grapes after losing an election.
Well, as somebody that has been in the Indonesian elections since 2004, I know that vote riggings, either in local elections, mayoral election, governor election, legislative elections, it's very common. It's just like corruption. In the old days, during Suharto's era, when somebody say there is a widespread corruption, people say the authority will say that where is the proof? Where is the legal proof? Of course, we cannot get the legal proof because it's very hard. And there is a journalist got killed because he exposed the corruption of one mayor in Jogja or Central Java, sometimes a long time ago, some decades ago. But then after we have KPK. We got legal proof not only about the size of corruption, but also about the modus, about the the connection, the everything. Because they have the power to intercept. Yeah.
Shoaib, are you convinced at all by Rajat's argument that this might have been rigged?
To be very honest, it is difficult to buy wholesale into the argument. As you mentioned, there were irregularities. There may have been a little bit of miscounting, some small-time cheating, but widespread and systematic fraud, I think, would be difficult to prove. And I think the Prabowo camp should present its evidence clearly if it has that evidence.
Greg Barton, now Prabowo is pleading to all elements of the people to refrain from physical acts of harm and so on, and he's asking people to calm things down. Is that going to be enough to calm the situation?
Let's hope it's the case. It's very much to be welcomed that he's doing this. He should have done it 2 days ago. He should never have engaged in the reckless rhetoric of calling out masses on the streets. He bears some responsibility for what's happening, but it is very good he's now on the front foot calling for calm. And that is important not just because of the power of his words, but because it may signal that he's recognizing that he's not going to make any advance by engaging mass protests. So that's an encouraging sign of that.
Right. So, Drajat, is that the clear plan right now, Drajat, that you're going to fight this election in the constitutional court, but you don't want people to go out onto the streets anymore?
Yeah, we will fight this one in the constitutional court. But please remember that the 212 movement has been going out to the streets several times for years now, and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people turn out, and then and everything just peaceful and even very clean. If you look at the national monument, it was very clean after the protest. So we have a record in Indonesia to have a very peaceful and very clean physically.
Right.
Protest.
Drajat, let me ask you, and I apologize for interrupting. I want to ask you about what you think of what the National Police Chief had to say, Tito Karnavian, who was showing reporters a sniper rifle with a silencer, 2 revolvers, seized from among the protests, from people arrested in the days before the rioting broke out. And he said there is an effort to provoke, to create martyrs, blame the authorities, and invoke public anger. Is that what your camp is trying to do?
I hope there will be a independent investigation into what happens in the last 2 nights, because lives have been lost unnecessarily, and we have evidence of the use of live ammunitions. And for sure, the 212 protesters, they don't have such kind of ammunition. So, and I've been gathering information from the field of what happens actually, because actually the protest is that they do prayer, and then they do, of course, singing, blah blah blah, and then after the Tarawih prayer, they disperse, they go out, they leave, and then there is a new crowd coming in, and we don't even know where they're from, and that's this new crowds should be investigated.
Okay.
Who they are.
So Shuaib, help. Okay, so
yesterday, last night.
Certainly. So let me ask Shuaib.
Yeah, last night.
Okay. Okay, finish your point, Rajat. Sorry about that.
Last night, Pak Amin Rais, Fadli Zon, all those has called for the protesters to disperse after the Maghrib prayers. Which is after 6 o'clock, around 6 o'clock. Yeah. Then the protesters disperse, and then suddenly there is new crowds coming in, and then they the one who throw firecrackers or whatever, and we just don't know where they are. And I asked some people who are there, do you know who's this guy? No, they don't. So that's to be investigated. Yeah, for sure.
Shuaib, who is this new crowd, and do you accept that this new crowd might have nothing to do with the supporters of Prabowo?
Well, we really don't know who this new crowd is, where they come from. Let me say, the opportunity for them to create social unrest was created because of the protest. I understand the right to protest, but I think in Indonesia over the last few elections, we've seen too many of these incidences. It's time for the leaders to understand that nobody wins when these things happen.
Greg Barton, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, blocked, sometimes for a short period of time, sometimes for longer. Because of the nature of things and the spread of so-called fake news, was it justified?
We don't really know at this point. We can certainly see that there's a crisis that the police and the government are trying to get on top of. They worry about fake news fomenting further unrest. They also worry about people communicating and planning through encrypted messaging like WhatsApp. If they carry on this ban for too long, then you'd have to, wonder whether that can be justified. But in the very short term, you can see why they might think this is a reasonable thing to do. The proof will be in the pudding. If they get on top of the violence and they show that they can bring things under control and they restore these services, I think they will accept this brief interruption.
Shoaib, give me an idea of some of the stuff that's being spread on social media networks and on chatting apps such as WhatsApp that might cause trouble on the streets.
Well, I think the police were very quick to kind of clamp down on the spread of false news or fake news on social media. There were one of the things I saw yesterday, for example, was a message or a video going out about Chinese policemen imported from China who were shooting at the crowds. This is a direct reflection or trying to reference President Joko Widodo's close ties to China. Right. Such small videos. A video was circulating on social media concerning that issue. I think this is very dangerous.
Right. So, Drajad, we have had evidence of some of the protesters chanting anti-Chinese slogans, such as "Kick Chinese out" or "Usir Chinao," and "Awas Asing," and my apologies for my terrible Indonesian, "Beware of foreigners," apparently that's what it means. Referencing Jokowi, do you endorse those chants or do you condemn those chants?
No, I condemn those chants, and me as a professional, I'm a professional economist, and I also do some. I used to be a commissioner at one of the largest Indonesia bank in Indonesia, one of the largest state bank. We do business with everybody, regardless of their color, their race, and everything. So I those chants, yeah.
Greg, are we seeing this being the kind of fruits of a very divisive campaign?
We are seeing in the short term some unwanted fruits. There has to be some responsibility accepted amongst all who would incite with provocative language and call for mass protest. But the blame does fall particularly on Prabowo at the moment. Hopefully this will be a short phase. Hopefully that this venting of emotion, I accept that the majority of the 212 protesters are sincere and don't intend to be violent, but it is this opportunistic use of chaos. We've had reports that police have arrested cells linked to Islamic State. There are others who wish to foment chaos. We need to accept the seriousness of the situation that allows things to spiral out of control, even if that's not the intent of Prabowo or his supporters. So I don't think this is going to be a long-running problem. I think it'll be over, I hope, relatively quickly, because I think there's a lot of will on that part. Prabowo's call for this is an important sign that he wishes that.
Right.
But this is something that will have to be considered in terms of accounting for the way politics is being done.
Shoaib, Greg is hopeful that this is a sort of momentary venting. Do you agree with that?
Given from past experience, I think it will be momentary. I don't think this is going to continue for much longer. We do hope, that the leaders understand the damage that it does to Indonesia's reputation, and in terms of giving people false hope, because I think the election results should be honored.
Rajat Wibowo, so you're going to the Constitutional Court with your argument that the election was not free and fair. If the Constitutional Court comes back to you and says the election stands, would you accept that?
Well, let's see how how it goes in the Constitutional Court. Will there be a free and fair trial? And let's see how it goes. And for me myself, I would do it. But of course, it is a collective decision. So. Let's see. I don't want to preempt anything yet.
But you do believe that the Constitutional Court is free and fair, and they are impartial, right?
Well, to some degree, yeah. But if you see some of the judges has been caught for corruption, and you see the amount of money, you know, that's if the chairperson of the Constitutional Court was caught by KPK, our corruption eradication bodies, and also another judge. So, well,
but if they're corrupt, they might rig it in your favor, right? I mean, if they're fundamentally corrupt, they might even rig it in your favor. You're open to that idea, right?
Well, we don't have enough money to do it.
Okay, this is interesting. It sounds as if you're hanging a big question mark over their legitimacy and maybe hedging your bets politically. Gentlemen, it's been good to talk to all of you. Rajat Wibowo, Shoaib Kagda, and Greg Barton. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Imran.
Still to come, Austria's Chancellor faces a vote of no confidence after his party's far-right coalition partners quit in a mass resignation. Can Sebastian Kurz survive a corruption scandal? And is hunger deliberately being used as a weapon of war? We'll speak to the man hoping to lead the UN body responsible for fixing the world's food insecurity crisis. What was once Western Europe's most successful right-wing coalition has been smashed by a corruption scandal. Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz's coalition with the Freedom Party has fallen apart after his vice-chancellor was filmed on a Spanish holiday island offering state contracts in return for money and favors. As the coalition collapsed, the ministers in question resigned and the president swore in new ministers. But that's not enough to fix the scandal. Kurz faces a no-confidence vote, and there's a real chance what happened in Ibiza might ripple not just in Vienna, but across the entire continent. Melinda Nusifora has more.
From a strong and stable democracy to a government in tatters, Austria's parliament and its reputation is in free fall. In the space of 5 days, a plot to sell state contracts in return for favourable media coverage was exposed, the Vice-Chancellor resigned, the ruling coalition crumbled and the government was dissolved.
Es sind Tage, die unübersichtlich erscheinen mögen, aber es gibt keinen Grund, besorgt zu sein, denn gerade in Zeiten wie diesen zeigt sich die Eleganz, die Schönheit unserer österreichischen Bundesverfassung.
That's a positive spin on a serious situation. The upheaval has gathered such momentum it could even topple the Chancellor, creating a leadership void.
Ich werde alles tun, gemeinsam mit dem Bundespräsidenten, um sicherzustellen, dass es in den nächsten Monaten Stabilität gibt. Und ich ersuche auch die Oppositionsparteien hier ihren Beitrag zu leisten. Wir brauchen stabile Verhältnisse in der Republik Österreich und insbesondere auch in den nächsten Monaten, um auf europäischer Ebene mitgestalten zu können.
It all started to unravel last Friday when 2 German newspapers published this video. It shows the Austrian Vice-Chancellor Heinz Christian Strache at a boozy gathering on the Spanish island of Ibiza 2 years ago. He tells a young woman, posing as the niece of a Russian oligarch, that she can expect lucrative construction contracts in exchange for buying an Austrian newspaper and publishing articles supporting his far-right Freedom Party. Strache stepped down as party leader and Vice-Chancellor on the weekend.
Es war ein typisch alkoholbedingtes Macho-Gehabe, mit dem ich ja wahrscheinlich auch die attraktive Gastgeberin beeindrucken wollte und ich habe mich prahlerisch wie ein Teenager verhalten und peinlich übersteigert auch agiert.
With his coalition in tatters, Chancellor Sebastian Kurz demanded another Freedom Party scalp, influential member and Interior Minister Herbert Kickl. On Tuesday, the president backed Kurz's calls and sacked him. In protest, every Freedom Party cabinet minister, bar one, resigned. New interim ministers were quickly sworn in as the president tried to steady the ship.
Man kann nicht oft genug betonen, dass es eine Übergangsregierung ist bis zur Wahl. Und Sie haben recht, nach der Wahl kommen die Wochen der Regierungsbildung und so lange wird sie im Amt bleiben. Aber die Betonung liegt auf Übergangsregierung.
With European parliamentary elections underway, the timing couldn't be worse for far-right politics. The coalition between Kurz's Conservative People's Party and the Nationalist Freedom Party was held up as a symbol of how politicians with differing ideologies could successfully cooperate. But now it's imploded. It's being used as a warning.
Das Video ist nicht das Ausschlaggebende. Ausschlaggebend, auch der Skandal. Ausschlaggebend ist, was gesagt wird. Und die Vorstellung, dass man ein Land so auf dem Silbertablett anderen vorsetzt, damit die Linken entspricht nicht meinem patriotischen Grund.
Chancellor Kurz is facing his own vote on Monday, when minor parties will push a no-confidence motion. But even if he regains the Parliament's support, he's likely to face an uphill battle convincing the public to trust him again. Melinda Nusafora, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Vienna by political analyst Klaus Jürgens. Marcus Howe is the head of research and analysis at Viennese Consulting. And Andre Walker is a political commentator and correspondent in Windsor in the UK. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Klaus Jürgens, you know, my mother always told me, don't go to Ibiza. You'll do things you might regret later on in life. I guess the Austrians are learning the hard way. How much of a shock was this scandal to you, Klaus?
Well, good afternoon. Yes, indeed, Ibiza seems to be a kind of troublemaker for the FPÖ. Now, honestly, it was an absolute shock to me when the news broke during the last weekend. I literally could not believe it. I was not one of those who actually clapped their hands and said, wow, wonderful, now the far-right party has a problem. Not at all. First of all, what video revealed, according to me, with all modesty, very outspoken in this case, revealed total disregard towards one's own country, towards democracy, and not knowing that this was a setup, simply believing it was true, basically selling out your own country, your own democratic values. Absolutely shocking.
Right. And Marcus, how even though this was a setup and the woman was an actress, the appetite that the politicians had to work with the Russians, what does that tell us about Austria's far right? And perhaps they have had previous ties to the Kremlin, maybe.
Yes, well, I think that it says a lot about first of all, their ideological affiliations, this skepticism towards establishment politics in Europe. But at the same time, I think it reflects their complete lack of scruples, really, that they will take assistance from anywhere they can find it, and maximize that, use that as leverage to gain influence within the Austrian system.
Andre Walker, given that Sebastian Kurz responded swiftly, angrily, called for snap elections, even though he is facing a no-confidence vote, do you feel that he's done all the right things in the aftermath of the leak?
Well, I think it's an incredibly difficult situation to deal with, isn't it? Although it has to be said, in the case of the Freedom Party, there was certainly a fair amount of evidence from countries like the United Kingdom that there were significant concerns with the Freedom Party's connection with Russia. Clearly, this is not a Russian connection in as much as it is a sting by people who are keen to deal with Russia in a way that is seen as illegitimate. Look, I think all I can say in response to any of this is that the Chancellor does have a duty to protect Austria from corruption. And if his coalition partner is going to behave in a corrupt way, then he needs to stand down hard on that. The Freedom Party have had problems in the past. They appear to be fairly united on this occasion. I know that previous stints in government have led to the party kind of falling to bits. What will happen in the future, I think, is quite difficult to tell in terms of the result of those elections.
And Andre, in many ways, it's almost like when there's a priest or a sheikh caught in a sex scandal, right? Because with the far right, they always say, love us or hate us, but we're clean. The leftists, the liberals, they're dirty, they're corrupt, they're with the elites. We're the clean guys. We're going to come and clean out the system and corruption, right? So in that sense, has this damaged not only the right wing in Austria, but might it make people question the right wing elsewhere across the continent?
Well, I think that if you are a pro-European, Euro-federalist, Guy Verhofstadt type person, then you would see populism or moves to be more democratic across Europe as a pan-European phenomenon, whereas actually I see it as a series of individual campaigns in countries that have had their democracy taken away by Brussels. And so the fact that the Austrian Freedom Party has behaved badly and is indeed a far-right party, I would see as having very little effect on somewhere, say, like the United Kingdom, where we would expect Nigel Farage to do extremely well in the European elections.
Marcus, do you agree with that? Because some see this as a blow to those attempts by Salvini and others to create that alliance of nationalist European parties. If Austria, which was supposed to be a success story within that camp, is suffering such a major scandal on the eve of a very important election.
Yes, well, the timing is certainly suspect. And there was an article by the former deputy head of the German Foreign Intelligence Service who posited that this could have been done by foreign intelligence services and without wanting to get into far-right conspiracy here. And this is speculation, but he does imply that Mossad might have been behind it, given concerns that the growing far-right bloc in Europe gives rise to increasing anti-Semitism, and they wanted to move in and take this crucial link in the chain out and set an example, given that the FPÖ are a link between the northern far right and the southern far right. I think there are holes you can shoot in that argument, for sure, but it shows the stakes, the international stakes of the situation.
That's really interesting. So Klaus Jürgens, firstly, tell me who you think was behind the sting, because that's fascinating, even though it's just going to be speculation. And secondly, do you think that this might impact the European elections?
Well, very briefly, on the first point, I just picked up all the newspapers while coming back here, and there are a buzz with conspiracy theories. Now, what is emerging so far is that a Vienna-based lawyer and a private security expert in Munich somehow set up the first meeting between Johann Budenos and this lady, and then later on, actually, Christian Strache was put into this meeting in Ibiza. So you could actually say the trigger effect was a meeting between Budenos and the fake lady and two other men. Is a foreign intelligence service behind it? I not necessarily believe in conspiracy theories. I think, yes, it is not impossible, but what about if someone who always had something against the far-right party here, someone who were just wanting to lay a trap for someone and then just wait for the right moment, and no better chance doing this before an important election to put it into the public. Perhaps my 51% assumption would rather go into this direction. Secondly, two options again. Will it have an impact on the vote, which started already in the Netherlands and United Kingdom today, on Sunday here in Austria? Some people say actually people who supported the FPÖ before will now come out even more in force because they think foul play. So this is one option. The other option is that the opposition, the Greens, the Socialists, the Liberals might win bigger than expected. Will Sebastian Kurz's party come out 40-50% majority? I would not think so.
Right. Fascinating. So, I mean, Andre, I guess what they're trying to say on the far right is that this guy is an idiot. Heinz Christian Strache was just dumb and drunk and maybe high or whatever it was. And, you know, FPÖ was a Russian woman and he promised her the world. But is that a deflection from the fact that the FPÖ might be fundamentally rotten and corrupt?
Well, I don't know whether the Freedom Party are fundamentally rotten or corrupt, but the experience that I've had over my time, both in politics and in journalism, is that very often these stings are something that the media will get very excited about and people like us will get very excited about, but the public are relatively impervious to. And so I'm not sure necessarily that the damage that people hope will be done by this will in fact materialize. But I will say one thing on the subject of Mossad. I mean, I think it is only fair to point out that the threat to Jewish people and the rise of anti-Semitism across Europe is almost universally the responsibility of the far left, not the right, and certainly not the populist movement. And I also do think it is unfair to equate the Freedom Party, which is far right, with more legitimate populist movements, the kind of centre-rights that are emerging. Bluntly, I think those of us that believe the European Union is an affront to democracy are not fascists and not members of the Freedom Party.
Having said that, but having said that, Andre, because in the details of the video, right, as they're deciding, okay, we're gonna, so you have this alleged investor, the actress, going, I'm gonna pump in all this money and I'm gonna buy a newspaper, we're gonna get rid of all the lefties and all the centrists and so on, and we'll fill it with right-wingers. And then he says, I'll give you these contracts in return. And interestingly, he goes on to say, we're gonna make it like Orban's Hungary. So they find common ground with Orban. Now, tell me how you feel about that, because they see Orban's approach to Hungary as a sort of blueprint for what they wanted to have here.
Yeah, well, look, I don't believe in necessarily telling people how to live their lives in other countries. But I would make one point about funding of newspapers and government contracts to newspapers. If you look at the United Kingdom, of the national newspapers that we have, there is one that stands up as wholly unprofitable, and that is the Guardian newspaper. But the Guardian newspaper is funded 70 or 80% by government contracts. And in exchange, it is a statist and leftist newspaper. Now, look, I don't believe that government should be financing media. But at the same time, given that the left does it right across Europe, you can understand the temptation for government ministers from the right to do the same thing. They ought not to do it, but I can understand why they do. And on the issue of Viktor Orban...
Yeah, but Andre, there's no evidence that the Guardian's actually filled with lefties and someone in government is then dishing out contracts to those who control the Guardian because of political favours.
Oh, look, no, sure, but I think there is an implicit understanding that local government and left-wing local authorities will finance the Guardian in exchange for political support. I mean, I don't think that's a particularly controversial thought. But obviously, across Europe, in the case of Viktor Orban, look, Viktor Orban is absolute Satan to pro-European left-wing, centre-left, and I suppose establishment figures. But he's somebody who's incredibly popular in his own country, and I can understand why people want to emulate him. I live in a very different country, Britain, and hopefully soon we won't have to worry about any of this when we leave the EU for good.
Something that Andre said, Marcus Howe, is that, well, what was on offer in that meeting is not that controversial if you analyze it. And he gave an analogy or two, and an example or two, a counterexample. Do you agree with that?
I mean, I think in the context of Austrian politics, that's not an entirely unfair comment. I mean, Strache did, of course, say in the video that, this is how the system works. Everyone else is doing the same. They're taking these covert donations through associations and so on. And Austria is, of course, in its post-war form, a clientelist state. So, there are within the party senior politicians who are close to very wealthy business people and so on. However, I would say one thing. So first of all, what Strache was mooting, if he was being serious about it and not just engaging in drunken bravado, I mean, what he was suggesting would be grand corruption were he to enter into office.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, further to which is also the fact that the FPÖ has made so much ground, sort of made so much of trying to be this party that's going to clean up the system, that's going to root out the, party dictatorship, corruption as they call it, from the left and so on. I mean, to say that on the one hand and then to act like this on the other is pretty outrageous, to be honest.
So, Klaus-Jürgens, if we go to those elections, are voters going to rebel and react the other way? And are we going to see Austria's entire political system shift maybe to the center-left as a result of everything that happened after the corruption scandal?
It is not entirely impossible. Now, what my esteemed colleague said is absolutely right. It is not only the FPÖ which is in the spotlight. After all, it is still Chancellor Sebastian Kurz who invited them to share the government. Now, of course, he can whitewash, gold-plate his own things, and why did he go into a coalition with the FPÖ? But ultimately, he said himself, I'm setting up a new People's Party, die Neue Volkspartei. I want to get rid of the old systems, including corruption, of dealings behind closed doors. I want to have a new concept, a new way of politics, a new way of dealing with the people and their concerns. And ultimately, he himself must face criticism. Your coalition partner did not play up to that role. Now, what do? Do you want to ever consider a new coalition with the FPÖ? Do you say we want a grand coalition? Now it is decided we go into snap elections. I would not be surprised if the Liberals in particular, partly the Greens and the Socialists, would actually gain not only 4 days from today, but in the upcoming Austrian elections for national parliament. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, no, well, they're sensing opportunity, no doubt. Klaus-Jürgens, Andre Walker, and Marcus Howe. I'm going to move on, but I thank you all for joining us.
My children went 3 days without eating anything. There are days when I think I don't want to be here because it's very difficult to be a mum. My mum is not here. She's over there in Venezuela, suffering from hunger.
Where there's no peace, there's often no food. And throughout history, the link between conflict and hunger has been deadly. Now the United Nations is sounding the alarm that the growing number of conflicts in the world is creating huge levels of hunger. Violence against humanitarian workers is forcing organizations to suspend operations and deprive populations of humanitarian aid. Around 56 million people are in need of urgent food and assistance across conflict zones, including Central African Republic, South Sudan, Yemen, and Venezuela. And last year, aid workers and facilities were attacked in all these countries. The UN Security Council has urged all parties involved in armed conflicts to minimize the impact of military actions on civilians, condemning starvation as a tool of war. Joining me now in Washington, D.C. is David Kirvalitze, who's a candidate for head of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. He's also the former Agriculture Minister of Georgia. Good to have you on the program, David. What's the biggest challenge in the world right now when it comes to food insecurity?
The biggest challenge that comes to the food security is that this huge number of more than 800 million people, they face the hunger. And to finish with that and to finish with the poverty, so we need to make a really quick decisions down, to make FAO as an opportunity organization that gives a chance to everyone to produce more and better. Because food security is about two things: to produce more and better, and to have access to produce. That should be done through free and fair trade, because we all witnessed during recent decades about failures in free trade. I think free trade is not only enough definitions. We should say free and fair trade, to make sure that farmers worldwide, especially small ones, are producing enough and they're having access to the market just to be rewarded on their production.
Right. So all things being equal, that's possible in peaceful societies, right? What happens when you come to a country like Yemen, where, yes, starvation and famine is used as a weapon of war? You can only do so much. Any department in the UN or elsewhere can only do so much to help feed starving people. At the end of the day, you are at the mercy of those who are making political decisions. So is there always going to be a limit as to how much you can do? Because war means death and hunger and terrible things.
I could not agree with you more. So it's a really bad situation, and I'm really sorry to hear that. I can tell you that I've been through the same situation by the time that my country, faced the war, faced the blockade and starvation and hungers. And during the conflict time, there is not really much that FAO can do. Even WFP is very limited, who is providing immediate food assistance to the people. So here we need a complex approach when all UN agencies, especially those responsible to making peace for the sake of those people who are absolutely innocent, who suffer to the ambitions of different political groups, and allow those two sister organizations, they are based in Rome, both, to get to the ground. WFP starts immediately with food assistance for the people in the need, but FAO has a just more comprehensive role just to help them to restore their livelihoods, and FAO itself should be always ready to deploy its team down there with all possible donors as soon as there is at least very minimum security level for the experts who go down and work to help the people to get back to the life and to restore their livelihoods.
Right. Now, I don't want this to sound like it's a job interview. I can't give you the job. But you are running for a 4-year term of office if you get the job. So that election will be in June for the FAO Director General. There are other candidates from Cameroon, from China, from France, and from India. What can you bring to the job that they cannot?
I can tell you once that Cameroon is not anymore in the race. There are just 4 candidates left. And what I'm bringing, so I've seen agriculture from all possible angles, starting from being a scholar, being a farmer. I mean, a potato farmer is actually that hunger and poverty draw me to farm from university where I was a PhD and teaching students. And being a farmer was a really, really important experience in my life because that taught me a lot of good lessons. So I've been a minister twice for the developing country, and to summarize this, last 13 years I work on the donor side. I've been on the side of the recipient, I've been on the side of many countries in transition. They are looking and asking for assistance. And that's also taught me a good lesson. So I remember everyone. I remember and respect those who've been quick and responsive when we've been asking for assistance. And I also remember those who've been telling that, yes, young man, leave your proposal here. My secretary will call you after a week or you're going to hear a month later. So that should never be a case, because when somebody is asking, so they need to be responded quickly, and especially in agriculture, because we are dealing with seasonal activities. And if we are late for 1 month, I can tell you that we are earlier than for 11 months for the next season, but we are missing the current one. So quick response is a very important one that donors should do. We need to engage private sector, public-private partnership. It's something that should be exercised way better by FAO. And this is something that private sector is coming on the table, and without engaging private sector, there is no way we achieve sustainable development goals.
And my final question for you, it's the year 2019. We have technology at our fingertips that allows us to tap into all of human history and all of human knowledge whenever we want to. People are planning manned missions to Mars, yet people are still starving to death. How do you feel about that?
This is about discrepancy between new technologies and transfer of technologies down to the ground. There are countries, they do it quickly and immediately, and they benefit from this. And there are many countries, and here is a few steps to be undertaken very quickly. One is that transferring new technology is not only desire to transfer. We need the people educated on the ground to absorb this capacity. For this, we propose in FAO to put there the special fellowship program for the young leaders from developing countries to get access to the leading Western universities worldwide. First, to get education, to get training, and also we're talking to the large businesses to allow those young leaders from developing countries to get a chance to go through internships there to see how it's working. Because as soon as new technology is going to the ground, that should be a capacity to translate in the language of the farmers and use it quickly. And in this case, we're going to move quicker and faster to reach our targets.
Okay, David Kirvalice, I thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.
Complete failure. I spotted that about. Sorry.
When people are getting attacked in their own
That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.